Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So the title of today's class is Let Us Be Transparent Instruments of the Lord's or in the Lord's plan. We're reading from Bhagavatam 9th Canto, chapter 4, verse 64. And so I'll read the translation and then we got Prabhupada's purport. So this is Krishna speaking, or Vishnu speaking to Durvasa Muni, who just was freaking out because he was about to get killed by the Sudarshan Chakra that was released and that was following him all over the universe. And so Durvasa has just approached Lord Vishnu, asking him, please, please, please save me. And the Lord is telling him, well, listen up, buddy. you offended my devotee, and my devotees are very dear to me. As a matter of fact, in a couple of verses, there's like a super famous verse about this. But this is the verse that's in this section of 2 or 3 verses talking about how devotees are so dear to God. So, translation. O best of the Brahmanas, without saintly persons, for whom I am the only destination, I do not desire to enjoy my transcendental bliss and my supreme opulences. I'll read it again. O best of the Brahmins, without saintly persons, for whom I am the only destinations, I do not desire to enjoy my transcendental bliss and my supreme opulences. It's almost like, as a small tiny parenthesis here, I just thought about it. You know, like in the Bhagavad Gita, you have Arjuna saying something similar. He's saying, look, if I win this kingdom, but if all my friends and family are dead, what's the use of having it? Who am I going to, quote unquote, enjoy it with? So in a similar way here, you have God saying, without my pure devotees around me, how am I going to, I can't enjoy. He literally uses that word, at least the way Prabhupada translates it. So, speaking of Prabhupada, here's Prabhupada's purport to this verse. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is sufficient, but to enjoy his transcendental bliss, he requires the cooperation of his devotees. In Vrindavan, for example, although Lord Krishna is full in himself, he wants the cooperation of his devotees, like the cowherd boys and the gopis, to increase his transcendental bliss. Such pure devotees, who can increase the pleasure potency of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, are certainly most dear to him. Not only does the Supreme Personality of Godhead enjoy the company of his devotees, but because he is unlimited, he wants to increase his devotees unlimitedly. Thus, he descends to the material world to induce the non-devotees and rebellious living entities to return home back to Godhead. He requests them to surrender unto him because, unlimited as he is, he wants to increase his devotees unlimitedly. This is a nice sentence here. The Krishna consciousness movement is an attempt to increase the number of pure devotees of the Supreme Lord more and more. It is certain that a devotee who helps in this endeavor to satisfy the Supreme Lord becomes indirectly a controller of the Supreme Lord. Although the Supreme Lord is full in 6 opulences, he does not feel transcendental bliss without his devotees. An example may be cited in this regard. An example that may be cited in this regard is that if a very rich man does not have sons and a family, he does not feel happiness. Sometimes a rich man adopts a son to complete his happiness. The science of transcendental bliss is known to the pure devotee. Therefore, the pure devotee is always engaged in increasing the transcendental happiness of the Lord. Shri Prabhupada ki jai. Om Agyanatimirandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshurum Militam Jaina Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I was born in the darkness of ignorance, but my spiritual master and masters opened my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge, I offer my respectful obeisances unto them. So as I said, I'm really happy to give this this class, and as I said, I thought of naming it "Let Us Be Transparent Instruments of the Lord's Plan." I remember I used to spend some years going to the LAX airport with a bunch of other devotees. Like I mentioned, Yagya Purusha, many of you may not know him, but Kastuba, when he passed through LA. And we used to read, there was a book that had been published by the North European Bhaktivedanta Book Trust, a big old red book that had excerpts of statements from the Gita, from the Bhagavatam, from the Chaitanya Charitamrita, excuse me, as well as statements from Prabhupada about the importance of distributing transcendental knowledge at large, specifically the form, in the form of Prabhupada's books. And there were also transcribed testimonies or realizations of different leading book distributors, right? And so the reason I'm mentioning this is because there was one famous, he was kind of like our hero. He's still around. He lives in Switzerland, a devotee called Harinamananda. And he was, there's this statement in the Chaitanya Charitamrita that says that in order to spread God consciousness, God has to empower you. Krishna Shakti Vinana Hetar Pravartana. And in this particular type of service, there's so many different types of devotional service one can render, but in this particular type of service, this particular devotee was empowered in phenomenal ways to be able to, we used to sell these books. So he was able to sell hundreds and hundreds of books, thousands of books to people, common people in the street in Switzerland and Germany. And so he was kind of like our hero, I remember. And he said one thing. He said, when I go and distribute Prabhupada's books, I pray to Krishna that I don't get in his way. I don't want to get in the way of the mercy of the, of the flow of empowerment, or I don't want to get in the way. I don't want to be an obstacle to really being used as an instrument. And I think his statement is relevant to all of us, and is relevant to this verse today. We are all trying to serve Krishna. We are all trying to become good devotees of Krishna, and we want to give pleasure to Krishna. And we know that, Krishna himself tells Arjuna, be my instrument. And so we all desire to become Krishna's instruments. Thy will be done, right? We want to be pure instruments of the Lord. So this idea of not getting in the way, excuse me, and I'll explain why it's relevant to this verse, is something that we can all, identify with. So now let's look at our scriptures. Let's look at what our scriptures say about this point. First of all, a real fundamental thing to remind ourselves or to establish at the beginning is the idea that, actually I was going to call this lecture, It Takes Two to Tango. If you're going to talk about God and God's pure devotees, or God's eternal associates, and the relationship between God and pure souls and pure souls with God, you're talking about personalism. Krishna Bhakti is I call sort of a hardcore personalist tradition, where there's really this idea of personhood as the foundational cornerstone of everything that's built upon it. The idea that the absolute truth ultimately has personality, is a supreme person, but person nonetheless, right? And that each individual soul is precisely that, an individual soul who has a distinct individual personal relationship with the Supreme Person, right? The Bhakti Center, we call it. So the Bhakti is based on this idea of relationship between God and each soul. The love that is exchanged back and forth towards God from the soul's point of view, and from God to the soul, right? in the Vedas, we have this term, this aphorism, Bahu Shyama. Prabhupada quotes it in one of the purports of the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna says, Bahu Shyama, I shall become many, right? I shall become many. And he clarifies that in the 7th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, where he says, Mamevam Sho Jiva Loke Jiva Bhuta Sanatana, that he's talking about us. And he's saying that every soul is his part and parcel, right? So every soul is an eternal part and parcel of God, and that and each soul is eternal as well, just like God is. There's this analogy of the sun and the sun rays. So the souls are kind of like the sun rays, and the sun is like God, and this emanation from the sun has always been going on, because each soul is eternal and God is eternal. So it's not like there was one moment when the soul was created, as in perhaps some other theological contexts or beliefs. But here you have this idea of an eternal soul, an eternal God, and it's kind of sort of like a ray of the sun that's eternally emanating from the sun, right? So that's the foundational idea of bhakti, personalism. And so when you have personalism, when you have two, it takes two to tango, then you have a relationship. You have a relationship of love. You have individual souls with individual free will, who, because they love God so much, give pleasure to God. And God trusts them so much that he basically gives them like full liberty to do whatever they want, trusting that they love him so much that they're not gonna mess up anything. As a matter of fact, as a small parenthesis, Prabhupada here does mention the gopis and the cowherd boys of Vrindavan, Vrindavan Leela. Well, if you go to the first verse, excuse me, the first verse of the chapter which describes the Rasa Leela, the famous pastime of Krishna dancing with the cowherd damsels of Vrindavan, which is considered to be the summum bonum of all of Krishna's pastimes. The very first verse of that, I think it's a 5-chapter series, the very first verse, the narrator says that Krishna, seeing these autumn nights and with the smell of jasmine flowers, thought of love, and he basically took shelter of his internal energy. In other words, his yoga maya. There's Mahamaya, the illusory energy that keeps us thinking, I'm a New Yorker, I'm French, I'm American, I'm this body, I'm woman, I'm man, etc. And there's Yoga Maya, which is like the internal energy of the Lord, which arranges all the divine pastimes between Krishna and his pure devotees. And so in this verse, Krishna is said to have completely surrendered himself to his internal energy. In other words, God, who's like, the supreme controller, the supreme organizer, the supreme maintainer, abdicates. The verb abdicates, when a king gives up his throne, he abdicates his duties. Again, trusting that his pure devotees love him so much that he can just just completely let go of any sort of responsibilities. And that's just so beautiful. This extreme love between a pure devotee or a pure soul and God. And so much so that, as Prabhupada says in the commentary, these pure souls actually can end up controlling God. They can control God. But because these souls are pure, when they quote unquote control God, it's totally different from the type of control that we find down here in the material world, where one conditioned soul is trying to exploit, the resources of material nature and to control and exploit other souls, right? Remember in the 1980s, there was this band, Tears for Fears, everybody wants to rule the world. But in the context of pure souls, what do they want? Like when they control God, like for example, you have the example of Hanuman, right? Hanuman, at the end of Ram Leela, which we just celebrated Ram Nomi, Ram says to Hanuman, hey, Hanuman, what blessing do you want from me? And then Hanuman says, no, I don't want any blessing. But if you want, please just give me an embrace. Right? Because Hanuman serves the Lord in the mood of servitorship, it's mentioned. So he just wants a glimpse of what it means to be in a different, in a not higher, because all rasas we understand are considered to be, on the absolute platform. When I say rasas, I mean relationships. Some souls are related to Krishna and in servitorship, some in friendship, like the cowherd boys, some in conjugal love, and so on. So Hanuman that's all he wants. Like, he's controlling the Lord by his love, and all he wants is just an embrace, right? In the pastimes of Lord Chaitanya, you have the example of Kolavichar Sridhar, this humble, poor banana leaf vendor whom Lord Chaitanya annoys and kind of like, gets on his nerve every day, bargaining for a cheaper price on his banana leaves that he's selling. And then at one point, Lord Chaitanya says, reveals himself to him as God and as Krishna, and says, "What do you want? And what can I bless you with?" And same thing, Kolavichar Sridhar says, "I just want pure devotion, life after life, to your lotus feet," right? So that's the wonderful thing. When a soul doesn't have any material desires, then he can't take advantage of God's being, enamored by his love, and because he really just loves God and just wants to serve God. So Prabhupada, being the missionary, the outreach giant that he was, in the commentary, in the purport here, talks about, brings this point of personalism and relationship to the point of outreach efforts, right? He mentions that this Krishna consciousness movement is meant to increase the number of pure devotees because God wants to increase the number of pure devotees, knowing well that A, he's going to enjoy more, although he's self-sufficient, and B, we, the souls, are definitely going to be more happy if they're, situated back in their original position of eternal servants, right? I mean, after all, in the Gita, in the end of the 18th chapter, Krishna says, "Nachatasman manusyeshu kaschin me priyakritamaha." One who teaches this knowledge to other souls, there's never been someone more dear. There's nobody more dear. There will never be someone more dear. So here you see the connection with trying to become an instrument, or a transparent instrument. Each soul wants to give pleasure to Krishna, and souls here in this world, especially in the movement of Lord Chaitanya, can achieve that goal, that objective, by trying to help other souls, come back to Krishna, come back to Krishna. Now, one thing that's important to mention, and it's the crux of this entire story with Ambarish Maharaj, is this idea of offending devotees, Vaishnava Aparad, as being a stumbling block, right? A stumbling block to one's becoming a pure instrument in the hands of the Lord. So I'll speak a few minutes about this notion of Vaishnava Aparad, because it's relevant, and because that's what this story is about. Ambarish, Durvasa, offended Ambarish, and so we learn, how grievous it is to our own spiritual life to offend anyone, really, and especially devotees of God. There's this really, if you don't know this, the mad elephant analogy, which comes from the Chaitanya Charitamrita, it's important, for you to know it. There's this famous verse, quote, "If the devotee commits an offense at the feet of a Vaishnava while cultivating the creeper of devotional service in the material world, his offense is compared to a mad elephant that uproots the creeper and breaks it. In this way, the leaves of the creeper are dried up." The mad elephant, an elephant comes into a nicely trimmed garden and just destroys all the plants that have been planted and cultivated and cared for, just destroys the whole thing. There's an interesting story in the Chaitanya Charitamrita that's actually, there's a lot of stories that you find in the Bhagavatam are reflected in the pastimes of Lord Chaitanya. So, for example, this story of Durvasa Muni offending Ambarish Maharaj, and then Durvasa Muni asking Krishna for forgiveness, and Krishna telling him, buddy, sorry, you got to go to the person you offended. You find that in the story of Gopal Chapal. Briefly, Gopal Chapal is an envious Brahmin, Kaviraj Goswami describes, and he's just envious of Srivas Thakur. Right? Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivas Adi Gaura Bhaktavrinda, one of the associates of Lord Chaitanya. He's Narada Muni, actually, ontologically, we hear. And Gopal Chapal was really envious of him, and so much so that he, like, outside of Srivas Thakur's house, because he was a married man with an own house and family, so he put outside his house, during the night, he put like paraphernalia that's used for demigod worship, which I think included things like liquor and maybe meat and stuff like that, to try to discredit Srivas. And so the next morning, he called all the townspeople. Oh, look at Srivas. You see, like, he calls himself a Vaishnava, but look, he's actually a worshiper of Kali or whatever. And look at that. And he, whatever. He's a hypocrite. And no one believed him. It backfired on him because everyone knew the character of Srivas. And that's another thing. You got to we got to walk our talk in this world. And as devotees, we got to walk our talk, because we can say a lot of things, but ultimately our behavior really does establish the bottom line. So they're like, yeah, give me a break. And even Srivas was like, yep, you see, guys, I never told you, but I'm actually, I'm a hypocrite. And they're like, come on, be quiet, Srivas. We know you didn't do this. And so, and what happened, because of this offense, Gopal Chapal got leprosy. And the text describes that he was suffering from leprosy for a long time. Until one day, he was at the bank of the Ganges, because he was rejected by society, because, when you have leprosy, you're contagious. So he was kind of outcast. And one day, Lord Chaitanya passed by his own arrangement, and he begged Lord Chaitanya, please, save me, I'm suffering, I have the leprosy. And Lord Chaitanya got really angry at him. And according to the text, says, you're going to suffer this for millions of years because you offended Srivas Thakur. Same thing that Lord Narayan here is telling, what's his name? That Muni. Just had a lapsus. And so similarly, as we see here with, what's the name of this Muni? I can't believe I forgot. The Durvasa. So just as Durvasa, as we'll see in the next verses, the next chapter, goes and begs forgiveness from Ambarish, so similarly, Gopal Chapal comes and begs forgiveness from Srivas, and Srivas, just like Ambarish, forgives him, and they lived happily ever after. And he got freed of his offense, freed of his sin, and even freed of his disease, right? So the lesson is, when somebody offends a devotee, then one has to approach that devotee and not just God, because God be like, this is beyond my paycheck, so to speak. This is beyond my jurisdiction. It's between you and him. Personalism, again, it's kind of cool. I'm just on this little theme here by quoting from another Chaitanya literature, Chaitanya Bhagavat. And this is Lord Chaitanya himself. And check out these verses. This is just a series of 5 or maybe 7 verses. We talk about the holy name of Krishna too. And listen to this. This is far out. So this is from the Chaitanya Bhagavat, Madhya Kanda, chapter 19. And this is Lord Chaitanya, okay? This is, right? We believe Krishna himself. He says, everyone, please give your thoughts to me. Please hear the truth I will now say. Anyone who neglects my servant and then worships me is very lowly and degraded. Such a person cuts me into pieces. His worship is like burning my body, is like fire burning my body. Now listen to this one. My holy name, he says, which is a kalpavriksha tree, a wish-fulfilling tree, destroys anyone who once blasphemes my servant. The living entities who live in the numberless universes are all my servants. Therefore, all living entity who harms another living entity will perish. I don't know who he's speaking to, but he says, you are more dear to me than my own body. Anyone who offends you will not be able to bear the fate that waits for him. If a sannyasi blasphemes an innocent person, that sannyasi will fall down. All his piety will perish. And then he finishes with this, raising his arms. Fair Lord Chaitanya declared to the entire world, renouncing criticism of others, everyone, please chant Lord Krishna's name. I will personally deliver. This is awesome. I will personally deliver anyone, A, who does not criticize others, and B, who once chants Krishna. That is the truth. It is the truth. When Lord Chaitanya spoke these words, the devotees responded with Jaya, Jaya. So how do you like be a pure instrument? Well, be careful not to offend devotees or offend anyone for that matter. But in order for you to be a pure instrument, you have to have a pure lifestyle. You have to have a good sadhana, as we say. It's really important for you to, especially in a city like New York City, which is probably the most passionate city on the planet. I mean, I remember when I came a few times I went to, I'm in Manhattan. I can't even think straight. It's just like my mind can't even think because of all the energy and the sheer passion. So in that sort of concrete jungle, it's really important for you to have a good sadhana, to really take shelter of your rounds, to really take shelter of Krishna's name, to really take shelter of hearing. Just like right now, you're hearing me. Not much benefit, but at least, I'm quoting scripture and quoting Prabhupada and quoting the Vaishnavas, so there's benefit from that. And I'm just trying to be falsely humble here. The point is, you got to hear, whether it's whatever, you got to hear scriptures, you got to hear audiobooks, you got to hear lectures of those devotees who inspire you. You got to hear or read the Bhagavatam, read Prabhupada's purports regularly. Because if you do that, then that keeps you, solidly fixed in not just the mode of goodness, but in transcendence. And when you are fixed in that, state kind of beyond the three modes of nature that keep pulling us left and right, then there's many less chances of you being an opaque obstacle for the mercy of the Lord to pass through, you see. And you can also like meditate on helping others, on being that instrument. Like Prabhupada says in the purport here, the Krishna consciousness movement was made to increase the number of devotees. Somebody helped you to come to Krishna consciousness, so you got to help others, and that helping, that effort, that consciousness, that mood of thinking, let me help others come to Krishna, however it is, whether it's, giving them some prasadam, telling them about Krishna, and connecting them to some cool Krishna conscious website. I mean, the list is practically unlimited. You actually stay in the fire. That reminds me, as a small apprentice, I remember I was, I used to go on the Polish tour with Indradyumna Maharaj. If you don't know, Indradyumna Swami is a famous, very famous and very loved leader in the Krishna consciousness movement. And his field of outreach for 30, 40 years has been Poland. And for about 6 years, I was on that tour. And I remember once we were in his room and he said, he used the word preaching. Okay, so for those who have a problem with that word, I apologize on behalf of Indradyumna Swami. I don't mean to say it facetiously, but okay, the word is maybe a little bit difficult to use in a contemporary context. But anyway, that's the word he used, and so let's just roll with it. So he said, preaching actually helps, actually saves us. I remember I walked into his room with my friend Maturanath, and he's like, somehow we got on the topic of outreach, communicating Krishna consciousness to others. And he said, preaching actually saves us. So when you put yourself in the mode of trying to help others, to give others the holy name, to give others Krishna's teachings, then Krishna is actually pleased. And because Krishna is pleased, then you feel enlivened. You feel enlivened. You feel enlivened. You feel inspired. You feel in the fire, as we say, and then you have a lot, and because you feel enlivened, you're actually getting what Krishna calls the higher taste, param drishva, that higher taste. And with that higher taste, it's like a transcendental catch-22. You get a higher taste. Because of that higher taste, then you kind of you not kind of you lose a taste for illicit sex, for intoxication. And because you're not engaging in those activities, then that gives you even more of a support to be able to do more hearing and chanting. And in this way, you stay enlivened, basically. and you're helping others in the same process, right? So so having good sadhana is really important for you. It really boils down to this thing of staying in the association of devotees and participating in the Yuga Dharma and chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare, and praying, praying just like Prahlad Maharaj prays, praying to Krishna, praying to Nrsingadev, please, let me, listen to this one, Prahlad Maharaj prays to Nrsingadev. This was one of Prabhupada's favorite verses from the Bhagavatam. My dear Lord Nrsingadev, and this is really relevant for you guys because you're right there in the cities, right? In the city. I see that there are many saintly persons indeed, but they are interested only in their own deliverance, not caring for the big cities and towns, not caring for the big city. They go to the Himalayas or the forest to meditate with vows of silence. They are not interested in delivering others. As for me, however, and this is how you can pray, I do not wish to be liberated alone, leaving aside all these poor fools and rascals. That was Prabhupada's. Prabhupada really used that word rascal a lot. He translated the word mudha into rascal. There's a small anecdote, sorry, tiny parentheses. In 1977, Vrindavan, Harikesh, ex-Swami, was working on the seventh canto, and then he read this verse, and he was just, and so and this whole passage of the seventh canto, and he told Prabhupada, it seems like you're really in the mood of Prahlad Maharaj. And Prabhupada said, yes, I'm always thinking about how to save these fools and rascals. So this is how you can think too. Of course, you don't want to see others as fools and rascals because that would be slightly arrogant, perhaps more, a little bit less fortunate, but the point is, it'd be nice for them to know Krishna. And so you can think, I don't want to be liberated alone, leaving aside these poor fools and rascals. I know that without Krishna consciousness, without taking shelter of your lotus feet, one cannot be happy. Therefore, I wish to bring them back to the shelter at your lotus feet. Bob Marley sang in his song, Pass It On, live for yourself and you will live in vain. Live for others and you will live again. That's the mood. So if you get in that mood of like, okay, let me live for others, and living for others is, in the Vaishnav context, is to give Krishna to others and to serve the Vaishnavas. Let me do that. So if you get into that mood and you have good sadhana, then you'll be that instrument, that pure instrument, that transparent instrument. And then you'll see miracles happening through your, through your body, through your hands, through your intelligence. And you'll see how the Lord is acting through you. So before concluding, perhaps I'd rather maybe we could just have a discussion, ask questions now, and then I'll just close with a few concluding words at the end, if it's okay with you.
That sounds great, Prabhu.
They're written, or how do we do it? Or maybe nobody has a question, which is fine also. Going once, going twice.
Sorry, everyone, I didn't have the settings correctly. Everyone can unmute now. Forgive me.
So does anybody have any question or comment on this verse?
Yes. I think Atina also wanted to speak. I will just speak briefly. I don't have a question. I have a comment, or rather two. I really liked your point about the extreme personalism, and it takes two to tango to really just come to this understanding how everything is so personal, and we are dealing with a person. We are not just trying to call into a very hazy energy that doesn't have a form. which of course is also kind of form of Krishna, but he is a person, which is really a beautiful reminder. And when you spoke about being an instrument, it reminded me of this passage in the Interior Kasu by Saint Teresa of Avila, how she speaks about that through our prayer and through our sincerity of calling to God and calling His mercy, we should see ourselves as being a wax imprinted. But it's an imprinted wax, when you have like a old school letters and you imprint them with a wax. So we should be like a wax stamp. But the wax doesn't even melt on its own. We are just allowing ourselves to take the mold and take the shape through the God's mercy, through our sincerity of calling to Him. But He still is awakening our heart, and He still is the one who makes us the instrument of His will. So it just brought that to my mind. I try to remember this example because it's really beautiful to realize that even when we are putting the effort, it's still those two fingers, mercy and effort. So we can't even do that on our own.
Nice point. Yeah, we're so fortunate to be connected to a personal school. I would say to Vaishnavism, to Gaudiya Vaishnavism, because all these things like love and friendship and just emotions in general, we consider them to be real. We're just in the process of purifying them because now they're kind of encrusted with all sorts of crud on it. But fundamentally, we believe these things are real. Whereas if we had adopted a school that is very much anchored in the non-dualistic thought, which is very popular nowadays, and then ultimately all these things like motion, love, these are all illusion. It's all Maya because this entire world is Maya. Brahman Jagat Mitya, Brahma Satyam Jagat Mitya. So you can throw away forever all sorts of relationships, all sorts of emotions. Whereas here we're just we're in the process of purifying them, but ultimately we do believe in love, and that's pure love, pure spiritual love, and that just theoretically is so much more appealing. I would say. Good point. Thank you. Anyone else?
Hare Krishna Prabhu, Dandavat Pranams.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much for coming on this channel and speaking. It's my first time hearing you speak. I hope you come back and speak more. Kastuba Prabhu is a very special soul to all of us who are part of the Bhakti Center community. So it's nice that you are dear friends with him. I was just, what caught me was just at the very end, you had mentioned just, for example, taking to Krishna consciousness and all the miracles that happen through, you said, I think your words, your hands, and just your being is what I took from it. And I was just in my time in Krishna consciousness, the word miracle really isn't used so much. It seems like it's something that is just, I wouldn't say accepted, but I would say seen, more insane in the Christian theology. There's so many miracles, almost like their whole theology is based on miracles. And I'm not saying that miracles don't happen and devotees don't see Krishna's hand in their lives. But because you used it, I was just so curious if you could share just some of the miracles that you've seen in your time in Krishna consciousness to help inspire us as well. Thank you so much.
Miracles I've seen. Well, there is one anecdote where, what's that story where a magician, a professional magician came to Vrindavan, I think towards the end when Prabhupada was nearing his passing and showed him these magic tricks, and then Prabhupada, and the guy was pious enough, because when Prabhupada said, well, I'm a magician too, or something to that effect, he said, I've turned many people from being completely godless to devotees of God. Now, who's the better magician? And the man said, yeah, you are. So I think just the very transformation of people who become devotees, who you see going from a lifestyle with really sort of immoral habits and behavior to that of aspiring devotees of God who try to place God in the center of their lives. That's pretty miraculous. As far as specific actual miracles, God, I'd have to that happened in my life that I saw. Because I think the greatest miracle is precisely to see souls take their first step to Krishna. That itself is so fabulous. Because remember also, like, there is such a thing as mystic powers, right? Mystic powers, and why? I mean, it's even said that devotees have mystic powers. They just don't use them or whatever. Like there's a story. I think it's Rasikananda or someone or one great acharya. He was meditating on some stone near the Ganges, and some of his disciples came and said, "Oh, master, there's this great mystic yogi who just came into town, and he came into town riding on a carpet, on a flying carpet or something." And he said, "Really? Oh my God, let's go see." And then he just lifted off on the stone on which he was meditating. It's mentioned. It's mentioned. Why am I saying this? I'm saying this because I think there's a fine line between like what is a miracle, like between mystic feats or mystic things that are related to mystic powers and actual pure devotion. And devotees of Krishna are not really interested in mystic powers or mystic like miraculous in the sense of like superhuman abilities, right? And so I would say, for me, in my own experience, it's difficult to draw the line between, like, there's different, I think, categories of miracles, and just because, I mean, here we just heard about Lord Chaitanya healing Gopal Chapal, so he literally healed him, and maybe I'm just saying this because I can't think of a miracle to tell you. So I can't. I'd have to get back to you on that. The miracles that I've seen, nothing comes up like, except for moments where I saw people coming to Krishna, or just getting people to chant the holy name in the hundreds and thousands. I mean, like for example, I was the lead singer of this band, this outreach rock reggae band in Poland on Indra Swami's tour. And as you know, there's this big Polish Woodstock. It's called the Rock and Poland Rock Festival now, and we have this huge tent where they distribute hundreds of thousands of prashadam, and that itself is miraculous. And we have our own bands who go on stage. We have a sort of a small stage compared to the giant one, but still, at least in 2003, I remember the first year I went there, we performed. There were 10,000 kids, 10,000 teenagers, and somehow we had a really good band, really good music, and you had 10,000 teenagers repeating, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare. I mean, I don't think there's something more miraculous than that, because other miracles related to, I mean, even this Gopal Chapal, for example, right? He was healed from leprosy. Okay, that's definitely a miracle. But he died. He died because the body is temporary, ultimately. So I think if there's any miracle that we're going to talk about, let's talk about miracles relating to the soul, to the real person. Because any other miracle relating to the body, ultimately, is temporary, whereas miracles of souls, changing directions on 180 degrees to come to Krishna, I don't think there's a greater miracle than that, honestly. And incidentally, or as a byproduct, you may see miracles of the sort of the healing type, or of the omniscient type, or of the but I think the greatest miracle is the miracle of Lord Chaitanya's mercy.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So unless anyone is there, I'll just kind of finish. Anyone has another comment? Or I'm at your service, but I know you have a busy schedule and it's already past 8. So anyone else? Okay, well, allow me to just say a few last words. Again, thank you for having me. And, closing remark, we should be happy, we should be grateful to have somehow stumbled across, the Krishna consciousness movement, the Lord Chaitanya's Sankirtan movement. And we should just continue, serving the Vaishnavas and, being, as Ratnath Swami often says, the servant of the servant of the servant. And if we just continue staying in the association of devotees and tolerating the inevitable ups and downs of our material life in this material world, in these material bodies, and somehow stick to the association of devotees and then continue performing the Yuga Dharma and, serving the devotees. And then we'll give pleasure. We'll give pleasure to the Lord and we'll feel enlivened and as happy as we can possibly be in this life. And then we can look forward to a wonderful, wonderful future, after we give up our bodies. And meanwhile, we can just continue serving Krishna together and giving pleasure to him, and this way enabling the Lord to use us as his transparent instruments. Hare Krishna. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.
Thank you, Haribol. Thank you.
Haribol.